In a shocking decision, the Speaker has refused to grant an emergency debate on the tragic issue of drug overdose deaths and drug decriminalization in British Columbia.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. Hope you all had a great weekend. In regards to today's video, we're going to be looking at a little bit of a rumble that happened in the House of Commons during question period today between Pierre Poilievre and Steve McKinnon. Now, this is all in regards to the whole drug issue that's happening in BC and the NDP-led government there by David Eby asking the federal government to recriminalize some of the drugs that they asked to have decriminalized a little over a year ago. Now, we have covered some of this already on the channel, which I'll leave the videos down here or up on top here. But before we get into that whole little kerfuffle between Pierre and Steve, I do want to play a little bit more of what Andrew Scheer started talking about, as well as the response you're going to hear from the Minister of Mental Health and Addiction when answering some of the reporters' questions on this whole topic.
The Minister of Mental Health and Addictions today refused to take immediate action, and as a result, Conservatives are calling on the government to hold an emergency take-note debate so that Minister Sachs can be held accountable for her decision today. Worse than refusing to take immediate action, the government has refused to rule out expanding this dangerous and extreme pilot project to other communities, most notably in Toronto. So they're refusing to rule out expanding this deadly policy to other communities in Canada. And that is why Conservatives believe that the Trudeau government needs to be held accountable to parliamentarians and are calling on the government to grant this emergency take-note debate immediately so that Canadians can hold this government accountable.
Now, I'm going to be playing Minister Sachs' response, and I really want you to listen to her when she's replying to the reporters in regards to her framing this as a mental health crisis, not a criminal crisis, as well as listen very carefully to her last response in regards to the question.
Afternoon.
Did you want to start with a statement given the development
No.
of BC? Or
No.
We'd like to know what your reaction is to BC pulling back on decriminalization.
Well, at this point in time, I met with Minister Whiteside in BC on Friday, and we are reviewing the request to the exemption that they put forward to us. We're sitting with Health Canada officials at this time, but we are wholeheartedly committed to continue to work with BC. They requested this exemption from the federal government with a full plan for a suite of tools to address the illicit toxic drug supply and the overdose crisis. Our commitment is to keep this firmly in the frame that this is a health care crisis, and it is not a criminalization issue.
So, sir, BC has asked you to take these actions, and as you said, you met with the minister. How quickly can you respond and give them what they're looking for?
Well, considering I only received the letter on Friday and today is Monday, it is under review with officials at this time.
Are you committed to decriminalization? If another jurisdiction, I know Toronto, for example, has an application to allow for decriminalization, would the federal government be in the position, given BC's experience, to be granting more exemptions for decriminalization?
So I think we need to go back to first principles of policy here. In addressing the illicit toxic drug supply and the overdose crisis, we know as a federal government that we work with jurisdictions on a case-by-case basis, making sure we have a full suite of tools available to help vulnerable populations. That includes prevention, that includes harm reduction, that includes treatment, and that includes a full set of health considerations. At this time, Toronto's request is under review. We look at this case by case. It's not an apples to apples situation, and we continue to partner and work with jurisdictions.
To be clear, you would still, decriminalization is still something you would be prepared to go forward with and grant in a jurisdiction.
The overdose crisis, as I've said before, and I say again, is a health crisis issue. It is not a criminal one.
What does this say to you about the policy overall with BC saying public use has gotten so out of hand, we have to look back at getting rid of this part from decriminalization? Just what does that say to you about this policy overall, where public use has gotten to such a bad level in BC?
What I say is that, again, we look at a full suite. Decrim is one of a multitude of tools that we need to use to address this health crisis. You can't look at one, some of the voices out there that are polarizing right now would like to look at this in singular frames. I say resolutely that we have to look at this as a healthcare crisis, of looking at all the tools that we need. We do not want to stigmatize people. We want people to get help and the treatment and services that they need, and we need to create a framework that supports them to get that healthcare assistance.
What does this tell us about the decriminalization tool, though? I take your point, it's a suite of tools, but this is one of the tools. What's the lesson here about that tool?
We are 1 year into a 3-year pilot, and we continue to work with the BC government to evaluate.
What went wrong in your mind? Because 1 year in, BC's already saying we got to pull back and it's too much. So what went wrong here?
1 year in, we're still evaluating the data and working with BC. Thank you.
Now, this to me is a wild answer because we've had article after article, report after report from the news on this whole situation where the safe consumption sites aren't actually safe consumption sites. They're not being monitored. There's a lot of people who are talking about getting the safe supply drugs, selling them for harder drugs, and now those safe supply drugs are getting into the hands of younger kids or teens, and now they're having overdose issues. And the major red flag, in my opinion, is like the reporters say, year 1 of a 3-year pilot, and they're already asking to pull back. That to me should be numero uno as a bad flag. You don't need to be looking at any sort of data. You should be saying, oh yeah, we effed up, so let's figure this out now. But now as we move into the House of Commons for question period, you're going to see Pierre and Steve go at it like I mentioned.
Leader of the Opposition.
After 9 years, this Prime Minister is not worth the drugs, disorder, death, and destruction. In May of 2022, he granted the BC NDP government's request for a criminal code exemption to allow crack, meth, heroin, and fentanyl use in parks, coffee shops, hospitals, beaches. Overdose deaths since exploded to a record-smashing 2,500 lost lives. The BC NDP government has reversed course and asked the federal government to recriminalize some hard drugs. Why won't this Prime Minister recriminalize these deadly drugs?
The Honourable Minister for Mental Health and Addictions.
Mr. Speaker, on this side of the House, we answered the call of the BC government when they requested the exemption on decriminalization of personal possession of certain illicit drugs. Mr. Speaker, what is driving this overdose crisis is the illegal drug supply. Every life lost is a tragedy. I met with Minister Whiteside this past Friday. We are reviewing their exemption request. Mr. Speaker, we have a clear lens on public health and public safety because we have a plan. They do not.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
She's wasting time while people are dying. In the year after this radical Prime Minister granted the decriminalization of crack, heroin, and other hard drugs in parks and hospitals, 2,500 people died. The overdose death in the 9 years of this Prime Minister have tripled to the fastest rising of the 11 countries studied by the Commonwealth Fund. Nurses are afraid to go to work because they have to put up with addicts using meth, crack, and weapons in their hospital room. Even nurses are having to give up on breastfeeding because they're worried their kids will be contaminated with the drugs they breathed in. What the hell are they thinking over there?
The honourable member, as a long-time member of this House, I'll just ask him to withdraw the offensive word because it is not parliamentary.
I withdraw because they're not thinking over there.
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, last week we saw the Leader of the Opposition once again encourage supporters of white supremacy, anarchy, and misogyny. This has been a regular occurrence. He draws the admiration of people who dismiss the slaughter of children in our schools. The Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you from Hamas. Calculated to create disorder.
I'm going to invite the Government House Leader to start from the top and to choose his words very carefully so that they do not cause disorder in the House.
Mr. Mr. Speaker, last week we saw the Leader of the Opposition once again visit with supporters of white supremacy, anarchy, and misogyny. This has been a regular occurrence. He draws the admiration of people who dismiss the slaughter of children in schools. The Leader of the Opposition now has 30 seconds to speak to this House and to Canadians once I sit down. I ask him to clearly disavow the views of these dangerous people. Will he do that?
That is an
Order. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
I unequivocally disavow the guy who spent the first half of his adult life as a practicing racist, dressing up in blackface, and who since accepted the support of Hamas, and now he's brought on the extremist and radical position of allowing legal drug use in playgrounds, in hospitals, in coffee shops that has led to the mass death of our people. Will he not refuse the demand of Toronto to replicate the decriminalization nightmare in BC?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I'm sad to say the Leader of the Conservatives, the Opposition, has shown us his true colors.
He has.
He speaks without conviction and clarity on a question that should be very, very, very simple for him to address. His silence speaks volumes. This is not leadership, Mr. Speaker. This is political cowardice.
Now, this to me is a prime example of the Liberals grasping at any straw possible to stay relevant with the Canadian public, because here they are debating and talking about BC's issue with people overdosing, potential deaths, the criminal aspect of this policy that they have forward. And Steve McKinnon here is just trying to be a shit disturber and throw a cog in the wheel of the whole House of Commons by bringing up something we covered a few videos ago about Alex Jones endorsing Pierre Poilievre. And this isn't the first time that he's done this. If you remember back a few videos ago with Christian Firth, where the Liberals tried to shut down his whole interaction in the House of Commons with the Speaker being questioned, Steve McKinnon did the same thing, where he decided to use this time to attack the Conservative leader when it had nothing to do with questioning Firth.
We want this to happen with respect for dignity of Parliament, and forcing somebody against their doctor's advice to do something that, according to the doctor, could undermine their treatment and their healing is not worthy of this House.
Demonstration of his character, and Canadians should pay careful attention.
So anyone who's paying attention is starting to see that this is a pattern that Steve McKinnon likes to take. As I said, he's basically just a shit disturber for being one. He's just trying to ruffle feathers and change the subject back to the Leader of the Opposition when the topic had nothing to do with that. But Steve wasn't the only one that kind of got the other side riled up today, as our Minister of Health, Mark Holland, started to question the evidence of all of these issues that the Conservatives are trying to bring forward, when again there's been reports, news outlets talking about this. Even the government itself, the BC government, is asking to have certain things recriminalized again, but he's saying, where's the evidence?
The Honourable Member from Fort McMurray, Cold Lake. Zimmer.
I'm sorry, Mr. Speaker. Drug deaths are up 380% in BC since 2015 when they took office. So the NDP Liberal Coalition unleashed a horrific experiment in British Columbia, and now the NDP Premier is pleading with the Prime Minister to fix this disaster. But what we're learning is the Toronto minister has decided they're going to double down and they want to expand this failed project into Toronto. After 9 years, this NDP Liberal government's drug policy is failing Canadians, and the Prime Minister is not worth the cost. Instead of expanding this, will they do the right thing and just end this policy today?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, around the world, opioid deaths are taking so many lives. The only way we can rise and meet that moment is with truth and evidence, and not inflaming through spreading false information this situation. I would ask the member opposite, instead of trying to seek opportunity to attack in this House, to work collaboratively on evidence-based solutions that save lives. Like her, like every member of the House, when a life is lost, it rips us all apart, and we have to meet it with truth and honesty and set aside partisanship, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Caribou Prince George.
Mr. Speaker, overdose is the leading cause of death in my province of British Columbia. This NDP Liberal Prime Minister's extremist drug policies have turned our neighborhoods into war zones. Hard drugs are being used in playgrounds, coffee shops, and even hospitals. Last week, a drug-addled man lit fires and consumed drugs in front of traumatized kids at the Prince George Aquatic Centre. The RCMP were called numerous times, but their hands are tied because of their insane drug policies. Will the Prime Minister end his deadly drug decriminalization today?
Hear, hear.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, I would ask clearly, what evidence are they basing their decisions on? And the answer to that question,
The Honourable Minister has 25 seconds left on the clock.
Mr. Speaker, replacing science with slogans, replacing research and evidence with talking points will not fix this problem, Mr. Speaker. There is not a person in this House who is not ripped apart when we watch somebody lose a loved one to this crisis. But to meet it with partisanship, to meet it with pretend solutions, to do things that have failed in other jurisdictions is a disgrace to those who have lost family members, Mr. Speaker.
No, Mark, unfortunately, you're the only disgrace. I don't understand how you can be so dense. What evidence is there? Like, pick up a friggin' newspaper or something. Or better yet, the government that asked you for this policy change is now rescinding it. They're asking you to recriminalize the drugs because this is not working. There's too many casualties happening now. Yet he's saying follow the science. How many people need to die for you to see that this isn't the way to go about it? I agree. We should be helping these people with more services like mental health issues or maybe housing situations. But supplying them with free drugs is not the way to do it because then it just keeps the cycle going on and on. But again, as always, this is just my opinion. I'd love to hear from you guys. Let me know what you think about this in the comment section below. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button. And as always, I'll catch you guys on the next one. Thanks so much.